the cloud. All right, folks. Well, welcome to the April 2022 hawk presentation. You know, we are part of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. We're the Matthews chapter, Habitat and Wildlife Keepers, and you know, it's fantastic to have everybody come and be part of our monthly free presentations. If you ever miss one, at least for the last 2 years, we've been recording them and putting them on our YouTube channel. You can find the links to our previous presentations over on our website, hawkncwf.org. So, you know, we were started about 16 years ago. A group of folks adopted Squirrel Lake Park here in Matthews, and this garden picture is a little dated, and it has grown tremendously. Since then, we've got one of my favorite bushes over there. It's called the button bush that brings in all the pollinators. It is absolutely amazing. And this would be a great time for you to plant one of those because the flower kind of looks like the coronavirus, at least the first version of it. I don't know what the future ones are going to look like. Anyway, so we got started. We're part of North Carolina Wildlife Federation, and you know, a big thing of the Wildlife Federation, of course, we're part of the National Wildlife Federation, is to go out there and certify your yard. Super easy. Most folks can qualify based on the things that they're doing. If you're putting food, water, you've got shelter and a place to raise young for wildlife, bird baths and bird feeders and bundles of sticks, a creek in the backyard, a puddle water feature for butterflies. Those are the kind of things that you go through a checklist. But we really encourage you to certify your yard, particularly getting a sign and getting it out there and educate your neighbors. You know, once they see you do it, they realize, well, hell, they can do it too. And we'll go ahead and stitch all these yards together and help wildlife. We are a volunteer organization. We have got our Earth Day with Kids in Nature Day coming up in just a few weeks. So we're always looking for volunteers, and we're of course looking for folks to join our leadership team as well. Once we start meeting in person again, we'd love to have folks volunteer to bring refreshments and all the rest of that. But we'd love to have you part of us, whether a little bit or a whole lot. You let us know how much you'd like to volunteer. We'd love to have you. So find us through our website, through our Facebook, as well as through our monthly meetings like this. Like I mentioned, we've got Earth Day coming up on the 23rd, Saturday, the 23rd, over at Squirrel Lake Park. William Subaru is our title sponsor for the event. Again, we thank them. We've all been on a little hiatus, so we're all excited to be back in person and out there. So we thank them for helping make that possible, along with the town of Matthews and Great Outdoors University, which is part of North Carolina Wildlife Federation. You know, I always mention this, save these. They're not bugs, but rather they're bird food. And so critical, not only bird food, but they're also salamander food and all sorts of other critters that eat insects. So try to go easy on the insecticides. Basically anything that has CIDE at the end of it. Fungicides, they bother us even more than insecticides. So, and then you end up with beautiful Luna moth. I wish someone's palm was in front of there, because that moth is about the size this way, about the size of a palm. Amazing, and how gentle they are. So you get those if you leave the leaves on the ground too. Again, thanks so much to our sponsors, Birdhouse on the Greenway and Wildology. I think many of you know, and William Subaru help us out tremendously. So thanks for that. And tonight, Mike, if you can unmute yourself, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you. We have got a special guest that's going to go ahead and tell us all about a really interesting critter that you may not know. This is a woodrat, and so these are native to at least the coastal North Carolina area, right? If you've got questions for Mike while he's doing his presentation, throw it in the Q&A, throw it in the chat to us, and we will try and get to all your questions. But I'm very much looking forward to hearing about his research with wood rats, as well as what's going on over at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences and what else he's working on. Without further ado, I know that Mike, I've got to swap my screen so I can read your where is it here, your bio.
Okay.
So I did want to go ahead and thank you for joining us. But Mike got his PhD in NC State, and he has done quite a number of things talking about small mammals. So he's a curator of mammalogy. I had to look up exactly how to pronounce that. Over at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences over here in Raleigh. So without further ado, if you want to take over control of the screen, you can present, and we'll look forward to hearing all about that. Like I said, if you had any questions, everybody, go ahead and toss it in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll get to it towards the end of Mike's presentation.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. It's good to be here. Let me just adapt my screen, minimize my screen. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm glad to be here. Thanks so much. And as Dan mentioned, I am local here to North Carolina. I'm based in Raleigh, but I do have some research projects that are out in your neck of the woods. And we do actually have two species of wood rats in North Carolina, the eastern wood rat and the Allegheny wood rat. And the Allegheny wood rats would be the species that would be actually Easterns and Alleghenies. You all fall kind of in that overlap zone where we might actually see either species depending on where you fall along kind of, I guess, in the southern Appalachians there. It's probably eastern wood rats, I guess. But there are two species of wood rats out in the mountains in western North Carolina. Anyway, I am the curator at the museum, and if you're interested, I tweet all kinds of science facts and information about our research and program, and it's just at Mike_Cove if you're interested in seeing anything more about my research. Oops. Okay, I think the biggest miscommunication or thing that comes up whenever I give a talk is I'm always talking about rodents. And I think this is the first thing that comes to mind when anyone hears the word rat or mouse. And it's, you know, this is not unheard of, right? We have rodents living on all 7 continents, mice and rats, and they are pests. And the thing that we have to remember is that rodents are the most diverse group of mammals in the entire world. And so we shouldn't just focus on these two particular species, house mice and house rats. We have to remember that there's a whole world of other rodents out there that actually have really, really unique and neat ecosystem functions. But the other reason we have kind of this negative connotation with rodents is because this is a screenshot from November 2019, if you could remember those days. And it was a CNN headline, 2 people got the plague in China from rats, from these black rats. And now I'm talking to you virtually because we are in the midst of, you know, kind of, hopefully it seems like we're on the downslope tail end of a global pandemic. And so this probably wouldn't even be breaking headline news anymore at this point. At least rodents weren't necessarily linked or associated with the COVID-19 outbreak, but we are learning a lot that about rodents and their disease ecology in relation to humans, especially kind of following COVID, because Really what it comes down to, a lot of the latest research shows that the number of diseases that are zoonotic, meaning that they come from animals and spill over into people, is pretty much correlated with the number of species of some group, rodents, primates, carnivores, for example. And since rodents are the most diverse taxa, they have the highest number of viruses and pathogens that could spill over into humans. And so really it's kind of unfortunate that they get this terrible rap that they're, disease vectors and filthy animals invading our space. And we have to remember that there are lots of positive rodents. If you look at Walt Disney, nearly every Disney movie has some rodent or squirrel. Squirrels are rodents. Mouse, rat, squirrels, all types of rodents that are portrayed in these really positive portrayals. And then you have, of course, things like Master Splinter with the Ninja Turtles. But you have to keep in mind, we still have these kind of ugly, negative rodents like this black rat here. But there are some really incredible species of rodents like this Hoodia. This is a pretty large, a semi-arboreal rodent from Hispaniola, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti. There's a few species from other Caribbean islands, but they're pretty large. We don't know all that much about them and their ecology, but they're pretty unique rodents. And then here, I like this one. This is the Patagonian Mara. This looks actually more like a rabbit to me than a rodent. But if you look at some of its features, it looks kind of like a giant guinea pig on stilts. And so these are endemic to the Pantanal and across much of South America. But the species, again, that I want to focus on today is my personal favorite rodent, and this is the woodrat. Specifically, this individual here is the Key Largo woodrat. And I'm going to tell you a whole slew of neat information that I've been learning over the past decade now, studying this species in the Florida Keys. But I want to put everything in context again. We live in this age of global change. We live in the Anthropocene. And so we have to just keep in mind that so much of what happens in the environment and the natural world is directly related to our involvement in nature. And so we're no longer disconnected from nature. We are a part of nature. And so we do influence a lot of the biodiversity around us through habitat fragmentation, the expansion of urbanization. But the other thing that people don't often consider are the drastic effects of invasive predators and invasive, not necessarily just predators, invasive species broadly, but in particular, invasive predators like this grumpy cat here in this camera trap photo have actually been implicated in the loss of over 60 species within the past a few centuries, especially endemic small mammals and birds and reptiles and amphibians, particularly in island ecosystems where they're naive to predation threats from some sophisticated predator like feral cats or dogs. Other species that have been introduced that have had really serious repercussions, red foxes, weasels, stoats. Weasels and stoats are the same. We just call them different things in different parts of the world, and ferrets, other species like that. But I'm going to take you on a little positive trip down to the Florida Keys. And I think this is probably the first thing that comes to mind whenever, especially knowing me, whenever I tell someone that I work in the Florida Keys, they think I'm listening to Jimmy Buffett, drinking margaritas down there, watching the sunsets in Key West. But what's fascinating about the Florida Keys is they're this, over 100-mile long island chain of all of these various sized mangrove and terrestrial islands. And there's a whole slew of wildlife refuges away from Key West and kind of the fishing and party scenes that we typically associate with the Keys. And so I work in two wildlife refuges in particular, the National Key Deer Refuge, located centrally on Big Pine Key in the Lower Keys. And so I do some work there, but I'm going to focus on my work up here in Crocodile Lake National Wildlife Refuge, which is in Key Largo, North Key Largo. Key Largo is the largest of the Keys, and it's the first of the Keys, located kind of after this 18-mile strip of highway and berms, to get over from the Everglades. And of course, just north of there are places like Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach. But the Keys are a peculiar place. And so I like to show this picture from the Lower Keys, from Big Pine, where this was one of, from our perspective, the first documentation of a raccoon grooming the face of a key deer, the endangered deer that are endemic to the Lower Keys. And so you can see we have a whole video sequence and everything. This is just a still of it, but this raccoon is grasping the deer's face. You can see it's getting its teeth in there, and it's picking off what we assume to be ticks and other ectoparasites. And so you often see this relationship going down with birds picking off ticks and other ectoparasites off of ungulates. But this was this really neat observation. And we think that it's a consequence of the key deer having no predators. And so they're pretty bold, and they're not necessarily afraid of other species. And it's driving these kind of peculiar interactions. But I want to talk about the wood rats. And in North Key Largo, there are actually two species of endangered rodents, the Key Largo woodrat and the Key Largo cottonmouse. And this skinny, long strip of habitat on the right is the last remaining refuge for both of those species. It's only, it's like 17 miles. It's not a very long strip of habitat. And this is the only place that they live in the entire world. The Key Largo woodrat is actually both of these are subspecies of the mainland woodrat and cottonmouse. And we have woodrats here in North Carolina, especially along the coast by Wilmington, the same species, but this is a subspecies that's endemic only to Key Largo. Now, historically, there probably would have been woodrats all along the Atlantic Ridge there. But we just never even documented, humans never even documented their occurrence before it was all bulldozed and paved for railroads and West Palm Beach and Jacksonville and Miami. And so the next closest woodrat population we think is north of Lake Okeechobee. It's a few hundred miles away. It's not just like they're over the waterway there and in the Everglades, as far as we know. And then I just want to focus on the habitat that they use. They use this unique tropical, subtropical, tropical hardwood hammock. And so it's a really neat flora there. That's a tropical flora, but the species are these temperate North American mammals. But it looks like a huge island. But I want to point out that there's this skinny strip where you can see these lines surrounding it. And then on the other side here, that is the upland hammock. It's really, really thin, long, and narrow. At its widest point, it might be, 600 meters, maybe a kilometer at some of those really, really wide spots. But in most cases, it's less than 400 or 500 meters across. And as you could see, there's literally a major roadway bisecting it in two. The rest of that habitat that looks like the island, it is island, it's land, but it's somewhat underwater. That's all mangroves. And so that's an important ecosystem as well, but it's not used by the wood rats. But why are wood rats so fascinating? Why am I so tickled by them? Wood rats are pack rats. You've probably heard that term before. Pack rats, wood rats are synonymous. They all belong to the genus Neotoma, and there's like 25 species of wood rats here in the United States, and they all play this interesting feature and role in the ecosystem where they are what we call ecosystem engineers. And ecosystem engineers, probably the most iconic ecosystem engineer is the beaver. Beavers fell trees, they carry them long distances, they block up waterways, and they build their dams and their lodges, and they create new ecosystems by creating ponds and pools and wetlands that wouldn't be there otherwise. Well, wood rats actually do the same thing, except beavers are, what is a beaver like? 30 to 70 pounds in some cases, like a really large beaver. These wood rats are only about 250, 300 grams. Their bodies are like this, and with their tails, they're, maybe 18 inches to 2 feet. And so this is a much larger than a mouse, but a small rodent nonetheless. And they build these huge stick nests, almost like a terrestrial beaver lodge. And so they're carrying sticks that are 2 to 3 to 4 times their length, and they're carrying them upwards of 60 yards. So they're carrying these things like half a football field to pile them up into these giant compost heaps of wood. And what they're doing is creating habitat for themselves. But more importantly, this is where the females are entertaining males and reproducing. And so the males, the stick nests themselves are large, multi-generational, and they're usually maintained by one female, and then her daughters will usually move in and take her place when she passes away. But the males also build stick nests, but they're much smaller. They'll pile a few sticks here, a few there, but they explore a lot more habitat. They have larger home ranges, and they're not really as restricted as the females, where they want this big, giant, secure nest to raise their young, like this mother with her pup there. Now, the thing that happened with wood rats and why they're listed as endangered is back in when they were first discovered in the 1920s. That first photo I showed of the giant stick nest was from 1922, I think, their discovery. And so you could imagine coming across this giant heap of sticks the size of, my desk here, or even the size of a small car. That would be nothing that you would miss walking around in the woods. Well, back in the 70s, they used to be able to find 12 of those for every hectare of land where they walked. And so that is a hectare is like 3 acres. So that means you could stand at one of these giant stick nests and see another one and walk to it in the forest. Well, it seemed like there might have been a slight decline there in the late 70s. And then when they were listed in 1982, I'll tell that story in a second here, there was a gap in surveys and searching for these wood rats, because they were listed, they were an endangered species. There wasn't much else to do other than buy more land to continue to protect. But once they started to do surveys for them again, looking for these stick nests, by the mid 1990s and early 2000s, they literally couldn't find any of these stick nests. They estimate that there were fewer than 100 of these rodents left by the early 2000s. Coincidentally, well, maybe not so coincidentally, around 1990, in North Key Largo, there, just north of the wildlife refuge, there was a large feral cat problem in the community, and they started a huge campaign to trap and neuter all the cats and vaccinate them. But they also started feeding them. And what happened was Obviously, when you feed cats, they can reproduce until you neuter them. And when you're feeding and vaccinating them, they can live long, have high reproductive output. And the other problem is when people know that there's areas where cats are being, well fed, vaccinated, tended to, that tends to be an area where people will dump their cats. And in many cases, some of the consequences of irresponsible pet ownership are that they're not necessarily neutered. And so it was kind of destined to be this ongoing issue with managing feral cats at that northern area. But I want to take a step back in history to just get a historical perspective of the wood rats in Key Largo. And this right here, I do work in Costa Rica. This is actually a photo from Costa Rica, but it's largely relevant to Key Largo. This is a pineapple plantation. And so you could see that it creates this really sharp edge, this sharp contrast to that lush tropical forest in the background. And this is effectively non-habitat, right? No wood rats, no rodents are going to be well, actually, I shouldn't say that. There are other rodents that might live in these pineapple plantations, but not a lot of the native rodents that we would have. But in the 1800s, Key Largo was actually the #1 pineapple producer for all of North America. And so it wasn't until 1906 where there's a major hurricane, huge hurricane that overwashed the entire island. And what that did was it put enough salt on the ground from the ocean that the pineapple crop was lost. And they decided to move it to, they decided to start raising pineapples in other places, Cuba, Hawaii, and in Central America. And so by the early 1920s, this is what that strip of habitat looked like. Remember, this is that skinny long strip of habitat in North Key Largo. There's that road bisecting it that I showed. And it's hard to tell. This is an aerial photo taken from a hot air balloon, black and white. But what I can point out, hopefully you can see my arrow here, is you can see these dark patches, right? And so that's a forest patch. But then you could see all this light area is all deforested. And so much of what was done was kind of slash and burn agriculture. They took out all the giant mahoganies and all the huge trees that were really lucrative for their value as cash crops, the trees. And then they grew pineapples. By this time in the 1920s, they were growing more tolerant plants like tomatoes and limes and other citrus. But you could see that there were still some small holdout areas. Here's another patch of forest. There's another patch of forest here, some forest up here. Some of these darker areas that might look like forest, you could see the row crops there. And so this is not actually forest, it's just probably lime trees or something like that. Well, this is where the story gets interesting. A lot of that land was abandoned, and it just was kind of fallow until the mid to late 70s. And this is the cover of the Miami Herald in 1982, a reprint from 1982. And so developers had come into Key Largo and slated it out and sold it all off, and they were going to build 45,000 condo units in that skinny long strip of habitat that I pointed out. That is the last remaining habitat of the wood rats and cotton mice, and also the American crocodile, the main nesting sites of the American crocodile in the United States. And this is really, to me, this is the most fascinating story, because this was kind of an expose that really was one of the last times, from my experience, that the good guys really won and halted these 45,000 condo units. And this was going to look like Key West 2.0. And the wood rats and cotton mice were emergency listed under the Endangered Species Act. And now that same strip of habitat, you could see, is all forested. There are a few holdouts of houses that were built prior to the 1980s. This is a little shrimp farm. There is a waste transfer station, a landfill, but largely it is an intact forest all across there. But the problem is, an intact forest from space looks great on a map, but when you look at it on the land, here's a cross section of what that looks like. And so you can see a lot of the trees are very young, small trees, and you can also see that Key Largo is a fossilized coral reef, right? And fossilized coral has lots of texture and sinkholes and solution holes and rugosity and areas for soil to build up and animals to dig holes and wood rats to pile their sticks on top. Well, you could see that the scarification process from that slash and burn agriculture and the lack of really large old growth trees that could fall over and kind of buckle up the ground with their giant root masses is gone. And so what happened was we started to see in these really young forests, you'd see things like this, abandoned cars. You'd find an abandoned car in the woods. And I don't know if you could see here, it's completely filled to the whatever's left is filled with sticks. And so the wood rats were using this car as their kind of substructure to build their stick nests on. And again, here's just a pile of junk. There's an oven, some tires, an old mattress, and a concrete slab across the top. And you could see all the stick nests, all the sticks piled on top. The wood rats were using this as the main chamber to build their stick nests on top. And so what this really got us thinking was that maybe the wood rats were limited by the number of areas where they could actually build these stick nests, and that's why we weren't seeing them so much anymore. So this was kind of like this really cool restoration project that is counterintuitive to a lot of what we do in restoration. You know, in restoration, I think the main thing we would say, look at all this garbage in this protected area. Let's pull it all out. And the wildlife refuge and the volunteers of the refuge said, let's put more garbage in to create habitat, nesting substrate for the wood rats. And so it started out as a wacky thing where they were gutting jet skis and finding old hot tubs and things that could be used as a structure for the wood rats. Finally, they consolidated it all down to creating these half culverts, these plastic culverts. So you cut the plastic culvert in half, find some jagged coral left over from the old crop rows that are left historically in the forest. You could find ripped up old coral, and then you could you have a supplemental nest. And the Fish and Wildlife Service had been doing this for over a decade when I started doing my research, and they had never truly been evaluated for their effectiveness, how well they were being used by the wood rats. And so I came in 10 years ago now, in 2012, and we started doing camera trap surveys for the wood rats. And so just a side note here, the name rat is kind of a misnomer. So the wood rat is of the family Chrysetidae. That's our native rodents, mostly mice that we have native here. Whereas the rat, like the pest that the European and Eurasian rats that we have are of the genus Rattus, and they belong to the family Muridae. They are about as distantly related as tigers and hyenas. And so what's fascinating is that this misconception actually harms the image of the wood rat, because they still hear the name rat in their name. And so I've always said that, you know, think of these, you can see that's a cute animal. It has a much shorter tail. Its tail is covered in hair. The tail is more robust. It has these giant ears, cute eyes. And so really you have to remember that this is actually a giant mouse that's living in our forests. But what else is cool is we could use the camera traps to collect data on other species that come visit these nests. So here's a native racer. But we also started to detect invasive predators like cats. And so you can see this cat is probably someone's pet. It looks too well kept to really be a feral cat. And so what we came to the conclusion was there were a few strategies that the Fish and Wildlife Service could implement. They could restore habitat and purchase more land to create a bigger protected area for the wood rats. But unfortunately, you saw that skinny strip of habitat was pinched between development to the north and development to the south. So the Fish and Wildlife Service has, and other partners, have effectively conserved all of the remaining habitat that there is for these rodents. They could build supplemental nest structures, and they could work on removing those invasive predators like this feral cat here in the image. Well, we conducted these studies, and we did actually find, what's nice with using camera traps in the Florida Keys is that there are not very many rodent species occurring there. And so we have, there's mainly these 3 rodents that we have. And so you can see the wood rats on the right compared to the black rat on the left, on the top left, and then the cottonmouse on the bottom left. And you can see that wood rat and cottonmouse are on the same stick. So you can see that size differential, that the wood rat is like 10 times the size of the cottonmouse. Okay, and so what we did was we conducted these surveys in the early days of the project, and we found that all of these dots here on the map are, excuse me, all of these dots here on the map are supplemental nest structures that we surveyed with camera traps, and all of the black dots had observations, and all of the white dots had no observations. And so the cottonmouse is on the right, and the wood rat is on the left. And so you can see the cotton mice were detected across most of these nests. But you can see the wood rats were largely detected in the center. You can see that the map is broken in 2. So the one to the left is the bottom part of the refuge, and then it just continues north on the one to the right. And what you can see is towards the very bottom of the refuge, there's a few wood rat observations, but then in the middle, there's quite a few. And then as you get further north, there's very few. And what we started to realize was that was because, remember, this cat colony and kind of where folks were dumping their cats and feral cats in general living on the refuge, they were largely occurring in that northern part of the wildlife refuge. And so then we started to collect more data on cats. And so we started to collect baseline data by using captures and recaptures. And so this is the same type of technique that they use to estimate how many tigers there are in the world. So these are my tigers. It's a little more exciting to call them tigers than feral cats. But you can see this individual, you could identify the cats based on their unique stripe patterns, like a fingerprint. And so you could estimate how many individuals there are based on that. And you could estimate how far they move. And so this could help inform their management and their impacts on the endangered rodents. And so you can see here are all of those camera traps from that survey that we conducted in the early years of. And what we found was that there are kind of 3 groups of cats that occur in the environment. And there are indoor-outdoor house cats, like the one on the bottom right that has a collar on, probably don't spend a lot of time outside. But even that same individual that has the collar on, we did see them chasing and consuming rodents. Then you have colony cats or trapped and neutered cats that are kind of semi-feral. They might associate with humans, but to get food, but they're still largely living a kind of wild life, like this one on the top right that has, you can see its ear is notched, but you can see that it's eating a rodent there. And then you have the truly feral wild cats like this one from Big Pine on the bottom left, where they're just out there living in the environment, eating wildlife, behaving like true wild predators. And what we found in Key Largo was that the population density of cats was almost 2 cats per square kilometer. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot when there should be 0 cats per square kilometer. And it is a lot when you have these endangered species living in this small protected area. And what we also found was that there were really very few, if any, owned or house cats that were allowed out in the environment. And so the 2 main offenders in the wildlife refuge were these truly feral cats and these colony cats that were spilling over. And what ended up happening was over the years, these are some of the older data. Over the years, the Fish and Wildlife Service was able to trap and remove cats, and they'd bring them to the local animal shelters or return them to their owners if they were owned, and they were adopted, or the animal shelters dealt with managing those cats. But what we found was that along with that removal, and by now they've removed over 100 cats from the wildlife refuge, we found that the wood rats were just really starting to rebound and start building stick nests again. And they were increasing their distribution. But the stick nests were just phenomenal. They were getting huge. And so I started this experiment on the right here, where you could see there's a stick nest, and you could see there's over a dozen colored painted sticks on that stick nest. And you can see that there are all these intricate color combinations. Well, this was an experiment I did in wow, almost 6 or 7 years ago now, where we huffed a lot of paint. I killed a lot of brain cells doing that experiment, but we painted 200 sticks in all of these unique, intricate triplet color combinations, such that every single stick had a unique triple color combination on it. And so by doing that, we could place these sticks out in the environment, and we could know exactly where they were located in the environment. And the wood rats, they love to decorate. They love their house to look nice. They love their stick nest, and they were picking these things up like crazy. And that's how we learned that wood rats were carrying these sticks, especially the really desirable colored ones, over 60 meters. And this is a big stick. Again, this is twice the size of the animal that's carrying, twice the length of the animal that's carrying it. And so you could just imagine how complicated that is when you have invasive predators out in the environment. And so what we showed, again, don't get too caught up in the details here, but you could see this, these bars are showing the probability of detecting wood rats at nests where they were not building sticks, and versus where they were building sticks. And you could see how it increased over time with the removal of these predators. And it's kind of, it makes sense. I've been laughed at sometimes because my research shows in a way that cats eat rats, and we're not learning much, but we really did learn a lot about the ecosystem functions, and we're still learning so much more about the role of wood rats in the environment. But again, you saw the title of my talk was of mice and men and cats and pythons. And so we did all this research in the mid 2010s up until about 2016, 2017. We had the cat management under control. We've worked on campaigns to try to educate the public about responsible pet ownership. And there's been a lot of great work moving forward with managing and removing cats from the environment, which is something we were all patting ourselves on the back. We found some of the highest densities of wood rats that had been documented in decades. But then this happened, and we started to find Burmese pythons. And what we actually think was that the Burmese pythons were swept in with Hurricane Irma in 2017. Pythons are incredibly resilient species. They can go, 500 days without eating. They can go almost a month without drinking fresh water. And so they can just kind of float around in the waterways and linger. And we think that in the Florida Bay, when it was drained with Hurricane Irma, that was a dispersal event for some of the pythons. And so now a lot of my work is focused on how to manage pythons and better conserve the mammals of the Florida Keys. But the problem with managing pythons is in many cases we can't even find them even when we know they're there. So these are some Indian snake hunters from India that the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission brought in, and they hunt Burmese pythons in their native land. And this is what they do. And so they knew exactly where to look and what to find and where to scout out, and were able to find this python. And there were actually 4 other pythons in this. This is actually a missile silo. This is actually the base, a Nike missile base that's abandoned from the Cuban Missile Crisis in Key Largo. They actually climbed down into an air shaft and pulled out 5 Burmese pythons. And not only was it 5 Burmese pythons, it was 4 adult males like this one here, and a 16-foot female that was full of raccoons and wood rats and other prey inside of its stomach. And so this has been kind of the ongoing task of my research in the Keys now, has been trying to better detect and understand the influence of Burmese pythons. But I'll have to give a whole nother talk about Burmese pythons sometime. But I do want to talk a little bit more about this maladaptive behavior. And so wood rats, in building these nests, are advertising their occurrence on the landscape, right? And so some predators like the cats, maybe even the pythons, might be using that to their advantage. They know that there's food there. And so there might be fitness consequences for wood rats, right? And that might very well be why we stopped finding wood rat nests in the mid 90s, early 2000s, but that wood rats weren't totally extinct even in the absence of these nests. And it might be this behavioral change where they were building nests less because of the cats in the environment and possibly the pythons now. And so you could see this wood rat carrying that stick in its mouth, and you can see it has no tail. And so that's probably pretty indicative of a close call, close encounter with a predator. And here's another wood rat with, you could see some kind of scarring and scabbing on its flank and no tail. And you can see it's not even building this illustrious stick nest, it's just carrying a few there in the base of that culvert. But what's really interesting now, and has been a lot of our work, has been focusing on all of the positive effects that the wood rats have on the rest of the community by building these stick nests. And so now our data are starting to pile in with all of the species that come to the stick nests and use them as habitat. And we have migratory birds coming to the stick nests. We have all different types of mammals coming to the stick nests, including the Key Largo cottonmouth, the other endangered species. We have all types of invertebrates and reptiles and amphibians using these nests. And so we really are excited about the potential of kind of these cascading effects, where when you think about keystone species, you think about wolves in Yellowstone restoring the rivers and streams because they influence the elk and their consumption of the willows and things like that. And what we're seeing is a lot of the same stuff based on this little 300-gram rodent, which is pretty exciting stuff. And so here's just kind of an interactive web where you could see things like the direct effects of things like the feral cats in the environment and black rats, and the indirect effects where some of these the wood rats are positively affecting the habitat for the mice and other mammals and birds as well. One other thing that I think is just like really cool that I have to share, and I apologize for kind of the jargony plot here, but I'm going to try to walk you through it. We also looked at the microbiomes, and microbiomes are kind of popular now now that we know so much about our interactions with bacteria and how many helpful bacteria there are in the environment and on our bodies and in our bodies. And what we found was that wood rats, this is a plot to show the variation in the microbial communities of the woodrat nests. And so you can see they're all kind of clustered on top of each other compared to the woodrat bodies, these red ones. And so you can see they're all clustered different compared to the cluster of the key largo cottonmouse, the orange, compared to the cluster of the black rat, the yellow. And so I've looked at these plots and identified the species. And what's fascinating is the species associated with those woodrat bodies, the microbes, the bacteria living on their bodies, mostly belong to these two families. And I murder these families when I say them every time. I murder the way that they're pronounced, Pseudonocardiaceae and Streptomycetaceae. That's my best shot. And I don't know if you recognize those names, but those are antibiotic producing bacterial families. And so what we hypothesize is that the wood rats are actually promoting good bacteria on their bodies and in their nests because they live in their nests for a very long time. And if you have good bacteria that have antibiotic properties that can keep the bad bacteria and pathogens from colonizing your nest or your body, then you could maintain a healthy enclosed ecosystem inside these nests. Now, what else is interesting is you see the breaking out of the wood rat versus the cottonmouse versus the black rat. And that's because the black rats are the ones, again, my first introduction of the black rats in this story was that they are the ones that carry lots of pathogens and the plague and things that spill over into humans. And so this is actually really exciting stuff because the wood rats actually have some unknown bacteria that have these antibiotic producing properties. And this is like, oh my gosh, not only are they cool ecosystem engineers, but they might even have the answers to the next antibiotics that we need to fight whatever the next bacterial pathogens are. And they're very different than what's spilling over from the rats in the environment. And so that is where some of my latest research is hopefully headed, where we're trapping wood rats. And I have graduate students like Brandon McDonald, who just finished. And we are removing black rats from the environment. So this is this is a tray of black rats collected from Key Largo. So these are housed at the museum at where I work, where I'm the curator. And what we're trying to look at is how does the interaction between the wood rats and the black rats play out in this kind of disease ecology world, where the wood rats might actually be able to recolonize the areas where we eliminate the black rats. And by restoring their ecosystem function, building the stick nests and colonizing those areas, they might actually prevent the black rats from recolonizing those areas and then spilling over into humans and spreading diseases and pathogens. And so we're really excited because this is the kind of stuff that people can really get excited about in terms of rodent conservation and why we should actually care about rodents. Again, so much of the work that I've done over the years in the Florida Keys has been, largely supported by the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Florida State Parks. And we're on a mission here. We have to show that the data is clear that cats do have a strong negative effect on wildlife in the environment. And so it is our job and our responsibility to maintain responsible pet ownership because it's safer for the wildlife and it's safer for the cats. You know, the python research is just getting going. That's Katie King and Brandon McDonald again with one of our pythons that we caught. And so there's still a lot to be learned. We have pythons with transmitters in them to hopefully lead us to other pythons to help remove them from the environment and learn more about how to manage them to protect the rest of the species in that endangered ecosystem. Now, what about it here in North Carolina? I promise I'll make this quick. So this is the putative distribution of the gray is the confirmed presence, and then the yellow and orange are probable presence for the eastern woodrat here in North Carolina. And so you can see maybe they're a little further west than you all in Matthews, but they're not too far away. They're in our neighborhood, and we have been I have been working with the Wildlife Resources Commission to conduct surveys. And so the Allegheny woodrats and some of the eastern woodrats here in North Carolina, they build stick nests, they build middens for sure. They might not be quite as elaborate as the woodrats in the Florida Keys, but they are just as cute and fun. But I do have to go back and just show you just how impressive these houses are that these animals build. And I do want to give a shout out to Ralph DeGainer on the right there, who is one of the volunteers that started building these nest structures in the first place, you know, almost 20 years ago. And so it's really been a pleasure working with him and so many of the folks in the wildlife refuge system and volunteers, and just seeing just how cool this ecological restoration is. So with that, I'd love to thank you for having me, and I will gladly take any questions.
You know, that is just fantastic, Mike. We really appreciate you coming out and teaching us all about, you know, wood rats every time. And I agree with you when you hear the word rat. It
Oh, you're muted.
I need to go ahead and fix that. All right. And so, you know, when you see the negative connotation of the word rat, and thinking of plague and all these other disease causing and filth, as opposed to the notion of a healthy ecosystem, you know, they do fit. All these creatures fit in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, you know, so many of us are gardeners, right? So a big piece of that, we're more than aware of invasive plants, and we can see those. They don't, I mean, kudzu and wisteria and those kind of things move pretty fast. They grow very quickly, but they're not really hidden. I mean, their root systems are, but they're there. Whereas pythons and whatnot are just eating the Everglades and obviously moving their way way further than just the Everglades. So
Yeah.
these invasive species are got to be such a huge challenge for you guys. What was being done to, other than the trapping and the hunting, what's being done with the feral cat population, in terms of like the success of it or not?
Well, there's no hunting of feral cats. It's just trapping and releasing them to the local animal shelters and things. There, not to say that there isn't hunting of feral cats in other parts of the world, but we've found that especially in areas where you know, there is concern where people's pets might be wandering onto the refuge, and we don't want them to be, you know, caught or get in the wrong situation. And so they are returned to their owners, and we are, well, I shouldn't say we, the Fish and Wildlife Service and their partners are trying to cooperate and collaborate and figure out ways that we could all work together to you know, prevent cats from entering the environment and reduce their impact on wildlife. And so, you know, originally it didn't I would say that the minority of the cats in the environment are truly feral. And those were not necessarily the easiest cats to catch, but once you caught those cats, you did see a lot of the really negative effects to dampen, because even though the colony cats are still killing wildlife, they're not doing it to the extent of these feral animals that are subsisting off of wildlife. And so, animals that behave like wild cats, they're consuming wood rats every day, right? They're to survive. Maybe not wood rats every day, but rodents and other reptiles and amphibians and things. And so removing them as the biggest culprits and targeting the truly feral animals, and you could usually tell because they had kind of this unique pattern, that looks like a wild cat, but they also were moving very long distances. They were moving multiple miles because they had large home ranges that they were defending. Many of them were males that were intact, so you could see. And you could also see lots of battle scars and wounds and things from fighting, from them fighting each other. And so I think that, I think that there's a lot of agreement that we all want less homeless pets in the world. And I think that it's important to keep that in mind and remind ourselves when we adopt animals or own animals, and that we should keep them contained and prevent them from having negative impacts on the ecosystem.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of campaigns out there by groups like Audubon as well, to encourage folks to realize that their indoor cats belong indoors, not only
Yeah.
for their own, safety. So, the types of predators that are out there that, for instance, those pythons, certainly they could catch a cat. It's on the menu. I mean, they're eating bobcats, so they're certainly
Right.
able to catch a uh, a small feline or domestic style, feral or not, size cat.
Yeah, that is a concern among folks that have pets that are allowed outside. But also it's interesting because we have seen these fairly drastic declines in cats. They're still around because it's a kind of a source sink dynamic where they enter the environment and then they disappear and then new ones enter into the environment. But a lot of what we think is happening is we do have coyotes that have invaded the Keys, and they've been there a decade now. So they're there to stay. It's not just some lone male that accidentally got there. They've been around for 10 years. And now pythons, and we think that both of those predators are playing a role consuming the cats. And so in some ways they have again an indirect positive effect on the wood rats and the cotton mice, except the problem is the pythons are not all that selective in terms of what they're consuming, and basically anything that has enough calories that they're interested in and can fit in their mouth, they're consuming.
Yeah, I was just actually going to ask you about coyotes. We certainly have those here, and we had a couple of decades ago we had quite a large feral cat population in the county parks and things like that. Not much anymore. Once the coyotes made it to this area. So I was curious if they had went down, what is that, Highway 1 or whatever it is that goes down the Keys, right?
Yeah. So there's no documented instances of them getting past Key Largo. They're still, as far as we know, restricted to Key Largo. Once you get past that Crocodile Lake, I mean, it's so residential, and there's so many cars going up and down of Route 1 there that it's presumable that someone would see one at some point, because there's just not a lot of. I mean, I know they're super adaptable and live in the urban environment and we don't see them, but there's a lot of people going up and down that road at all hours of the night, and there's not many green spaces, large green spaces, to provide them that kind of cover to just be elusive, to not be documented getting into the other islands.
Right. I imagine they're also on the menu for those pythons also.
Yeah, could
So,
be.
hey, so we had a couple of questions. One of them was, are they pack rats and do they like shiny things? You did talk about the sticks that they collect. Was there some other fun stuff that you guys were able to, human artifacts, if you will?
Yeah. Yes, they are pack rats. They collect trinkets and treasures. They decorate their houses. They'll put like a raccoon skull on the top. I've seen shells. One time we have these camera traps, and they're held onto the tree with a bungee cord. One time a woodrat chewed off the bungee cord and pulled the whole camera into their nest, and we had to cut the bungee cord off because we couldn't pull it out because it was hooked on the inside of the nest. I have, oh man, one of the one I apparently dropped a Sharpie in the woods at some point, and a woodrat picked it up and carried it in front of the camera, and that was pretty embarrassing because that's just blatant poor management of my possessions there. But they'll pick up interesting garbage and things for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Teach them how to clean the forest up, that's for sure. You know, I don't know if you're familiar with the Candid Critters project,
Yeah.
being over there at the museum. One of our folks, Caryl Mallory, she did a presentation on camera traps, if you will, on her own property, and had all sorts of fun stuff, including a bobcat that I found just absolutely phenomenal. She's got nearly 20 acres south of the Charlotte, the Matthews area. So she was asking if the Candid Critters project is going to begin again.
The Candid Critters project is not going to begin again. That was a short term, is like a 3 or 4 year project. Maybe it could have even been a 5-year project with the museum and the Wildlife Resources Commission. A lot of those data are still being analyzed regularly. But we've, well, I shouldn't say we, the folks from the museum, Roland Kays and myself, we still have camera trap surveys, and the WRC, the Wildlife Resources Commission, certainly has camera trap surveys all over the state, but we don't necessarily have a full-on citizen science project at the moment. What I will say is, and my recommendation is, for folks that are interested in setting camera traps and contributing that data to other projects, or making them available, I recommend posting them to the iNaturalist platform, because you could post camera trap photos to iNaturalist, and iNaturalist, as long as the multiple reviewers will review your species identification, and it will go into a platform that is also used by other biodiversity databases. They pull from iNaturalist the research grade photos. So I tell people all the time, especially for unique things in your neck of the woods, maybe fox squirrels would be a cool one. If you saw a fox squirrel, might not be all that common. Other I don't know. I'm trying to think of where you all are, but I don't think you would necessarily be seeing wood rats. It's possible that there are eastern wood rats out there, but I think we would know if they were around. But all types of species, you could post anything to iNaturalist. And the other nice thing about iNaturalist is you could gain some community consensus when you have a photo of an animal, or snap one even with your phone. If you are concerned, you're not sure what the species is or not. And so it's kind of, the platform's been around for a while. It's a cool social media community, but now scientists are really starting to use it a lot more for research purposes. And so the more data, the better.
Yeah, we had another speaker talk about that. That's what they go out there, get more data points, location wise, that type of thing. So yeah, we're
Yeah.
big fans of it. This time of year, they go ahead and do a bio blitz where they encourage folks from all over to snap pictures of lots of things that they see, you know, whether it be plants, animals. It'll even identify a human. Uh, Unfortunately, they can't identify a good human from a bad one, but they will tell you a safe snake from maybe an unsafe one that you ought to just leave alone anyway. But
Yeah.
Mike, I really got to tell you again, thank you so much for coming to speak to our group. You know, it's always fun to learn about a new creature that I would argue that folks here hadn't heard about before. We're really looking forward to seeing what you do in North Carolina. You know, we have you know, all the fondness and appreciation for nature from Florida, but you know, we're a little bit more curious about the fun stuff that you're about to discover in your new research here in the state too. So
Sure thing.
really
Yeah,
cool.
we'll give you a talk in another year or so.
Nice, nice. Well, we look forward to coming to visit you at the museum as well. And all the
Okay.
best to you. Have a wonderful Earth Day. And we look forward to, I know we're getting some thank yous in the chats. We
Perfect. Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
All
And if
right.
there's
Thank
anything we
you
can
for
do
having
for
me.
you, we'd
All
be
right.
glad. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming to join us tonight. And we look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. Come join us at Earth Day on the 23rd over at Squirrel Lake Park. We'll see you later, Mike.
Perfect. Thanks
Take
so
care,
much.
everybody.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.